She built a company worth $300 million. He could barely make rent. They had absolutely nothing in common, except the one night everything she had built came crashing down, and every single person she trusted disappeared. Every board member, every executive, every friend with a business card and a smile. Gone. Only one person stayed. A man with dirt under his fingernails, a beat-up truck in her driveway, and a little boy asleep in the back seat. This is the story of what happens when the most powerful woman in the room finally stops pretending she doesn't need anyone. If this story finds you, hit like, drop a comment with your city, and let's see how far this one travels. The lawnmower died on a Tuesday. Liam Foster was 3 houses into his morning route when the engine coughed twice, shuddered like something inside it had given up on life, and went silent. He crouched beside it on the sidewalk of Maple Creek Drive, forearms resting on his knees, staring at the machine the way a man stares at something he can't afford to replace and can't afford to keep broken. "Come on," he muttered. He pulled the starter cord. Nothing. Pulled it again. A weak sputter. Third time. Silence so complete he could hear birds somewhere down the street, completely indifferent to his situation. He sat back on his heels and exhaled through his nose. Behind him, from the cab of his truck, he heard the passenger window roll down. "Dad, is it dead?" Liam looked over his shoulder. His son, Noah, 7 years old and currently wearing a dinosaur t-shirt with a mustard stain near the collar that Liam had tried twice to wash out, was hanging half out the window with the particular curiosity of a child who finds mechanical failure interesting rather than catastrophic. "It's not dead," Liam said. "It's resting." "Machines don't rest. This one does." Noah considered that. Mr. Peterson down the block says if you treat machines right, they last forever. Mr. Peterson also talks to his car, so maybe you should try talking to it. Liam stood up, wiped his palms on the back of his jeans, and looked at the mower with a flat expression. "Please start," he said. He pulled the cord. The engine caught, ran rough for 3 seconds, and then smoothed out into a low, steady growl. Noah pumped his fist out the window. "Yes!" Liam shook his head, picked up the handle, and got back to work. That was the kind of morning it was. That was the kind of year it had been, really. A sequence of things almost breaking, and Liam holding them together through some combination of stubbornness and luck and pure refusal to look at the math too carefully. The business had been running for 4 years now, Foster Landscaping and Grounds, which was a generous name for what was essentially Liam. 2 part-time college kids who showed up maybe 60% of the time, 1 aging trailer, and equipment that had seen better decades. He had clients. He had a reputation for doing solid work without overcharging. He had a waiting list that grew in spring and shrank to nothing by November, and the winters were always the part where the numbers stopped making sense. He'd started the business the year after his marriage ended. Before that, he'd worked for a landscaping company owned by a man named Dennis Hobart, who paid him fairly and treated him well, and then retired to Florida at 62 and sold the whole operation to a regional chain that immediately cut wages and doubled the workload. Liam had lasted 4 months with the new ownership before he'd done the math on what it would take to go out on his own and decided the risk was worth it. He hadn't factored in Elena leaving 6 months after that. He didn't blame her exactly. That was the honest part he'd spent a long time getting to. Elena had wanted a different kind of life. Not cruel, not unfair, just genuinely different from what Liam could offer. She'd moved to Portland. She sent Noah birthday cards and called on holidays and had, somewhere along the way, rebuilt herself into a person who seemed genuinely okay. Liam was glad for that. It had taken him a while to get glad, but he got there. What she'd left behind was a 3-bedroom rental in Clover Ridge, Ohio, a 7-year-old who had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness, and a silence in the house every evening that Liam had learned to fill with noise, the television, the radio in the kitchen, Noah's running commentary on whatever was happening in his head. The silence was manageable now. It had not always been manageable. He finished Maple Creek Drive by 9:30 and drove Noah to school with 7 minutes to spare. "You don't have to walk me in," Noah said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I know. I'm not a baby." "I know that too." Noah grabbed his backpack from the floor, then paused with his hand on the door handle. "Are you picking me up today, or is it Mrs. Callahan?" "Mrs. Callahan's got you until 4. I've got a site visit." The big house? Liam nodded. He told Noah about it at dinner the night before. A new contract, an estate property on the north side of town, the kind of work that could carry them through the winter if he played it right. He'd said it casually, in the tone he used when he was trying not to show how much something mattered. Noah seemed to understand more than Liam gave him credit for. He usually did. Good luck, Noah said, and meant it in a way that wasn't dramatic, just solid and real, the way a kid says something when he's grown up knowing what it means for luck to matter. Thanks, bud. Noah got out of the truck, hitched his backpack up, and walked toward the school entrance without looking back. Liam watched him go until the doors closed. The estate was on Halcyon Drive, which was a name that meant nothing to Liam until he turned onto it and realized it was the kind of street that existed behind gates and rows of mature oaks and the particular quiet of serious money. He'd been here before for smaller jobs, a pruning here, a drainage consultation there, but this was different. He'd gotten the call 3 days ago from a property manager named Randall, who spoke in the clipped, efficient manner of a man managing multiple properties for someone who didn't want to deal with logistics. The owner wants a full assessment, 12 acres, pool surrounds, formal gardens, wooded trail sections, the works. She's been through 2 contractors already this year. She expects precision. Liam had asked what happened to the 2 previous contractors. Randall had paused. The first one missed a deadline during the spring planting season. The second sent a crew that damaged a section of the Heritage Rose Garden. She's particular about the property. Got it. Do you actually got it, Mr. Foster? Or are you saying that? Both, Liam had said. There was a pause that might have been Randall suppressing a reaction. Monday at 10. Don't be late. He wasn't late. He parked the truck on the gravel drive at 9:58, walked around to the tailgate to pull out his clipboard and measuring wheel, and stood for a moment taking in the scope of the grounds. It was a lot of work. It was also genuinely beautiful. Someone had originally designed this place with real care, but it had gotten away from itself in places. The formal garden beds needed a complete overhaul. The rear perimeter had tree sections that were crowding each other wrong. The pool surrounds had product in them that wasn't suited to the climate. He was making notes when he heard the front door. He'd expected Randall. What he got was a woman who walked like she had somewhere more important to be and was doing the property the courtesy of her attention. She was dressed in what looked like work clothes, dark slacks, a fitted gray top, hair pulled back, but there was nothing casual about the way she carried herself. She moved with the kind of economical precision that came from years of controlling every room she walked into. Olivia Grant was, in person, less intimidating than her reputation, and more so at the same time. Liam had looked her up. He'd have been an idiot not to. She was the founder and CEO of Grantline Technologies, a company that had started as a software platform for logistics optimization and had grown, over the past 7 years, into something significantly more complicated and significantly more valuable. 30 years old. Self-funded to start. Series B at 26. Current valuation north of $300 million and climbing. She'd been on the covers of 2 business magazines in the past year and had given a keynote at a tech summit in San Francisco that, according to the article he'd read, had received a standing ovation. She did not look like someone who needed him to cut her grass. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at him with the direct, evaluating gaze of someone who had learned to read people fast as a survival skill. "Mr. Foster," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Randall said you've been doing this for 4 years. Going on 5. You run the crew yourself?" "Mostly. I've got 2 part-timers for the heavy seasons." "What happened to them?" "Today? One's got class in the afternoon. The other one, honestly, I don't know. I haven't heard from him since Thursday." He'd said it before he thought about it, and he watched her face for the reaction. There was a flicker of something. Not quite a smile, but adjacent. "At least you're honest about it," she said. Seemed like the more useful approach. She looked at his clipboard. "What do you have so far?" He walked her through it. Not performing competence, just actually showing her what he'd observed. The drainage issue along the East Garden wall, the box hedges that had been trimmed into shapes they weren't suited for and were struggling to hold form. The section of woodland trail that needed grading before fall rain turned it into a liability. He didn't oversell it or soften it. He told her what was wrong and what it would take to fix it. She listened without interrupting, which he appreciated. She asked two specific questions, one about the heritage roses, one about the pool surround product, and both questions were the right ones, which meant she either knew more than she let on or had done her homework. "The contractor who damaged the rose section," Liam said, when they were standing in the formal garden. "What exactly did they do?" "They used the wrong soil amendment. The roses in that bed are 60 years old. They've been in my family since my grandmother planted them." She said it without excessive weight, just as a fact. "They're not replaceable, so yes, I'm particular." "That's fair." She looked at him. "Most contractors tell me I'm being unreasonable." "Most contractors probably want the job more than they want to tell you the truth." She was quiet for a moment. "And you?" "I want the job," he said, "but I'll tell you the truth anyway. It's less work." The second flicker, definitely adjacent to a smile. She gave him access to the full property and told him to finish his assessment and send the proposal by end of week. She didn't tell him he had the job yet. He didn't expect her to. She struck him as someone who made decisions on evidence rather than instinct, and he'd given her maybe 45 minutes of evidence. He spent another 2 hours on the grounds after she went back inside. He was crouched near the east drainage point, pressing his fingers into the soil to check the compaction, when he heard small footsteps on the gravel. He turned. A girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was standing at the edge of the garden path with a plastic watering can. She had dark hair and her mother's eyes, direct, watchful. And she was looking at him with the particular seriousness of a child who has decided to evaluate a stranger. "You're touching the dirt," she said. "I am." "Why?" "I'm checking if it's too hard." She looked at the ground, then back at him. "Is it?" "Little bit." She considered this. "Can you fix it?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, apparently satisfied. "My name is Sophie." "I'm Liam. Do you know about flowers?" "A fair amount." "My grandma planted those roses." She pointed toward the far beds without looking. "Mama says I have to be careful." "Your mom's right," he said. "Those are worth being careful about." Sophie studied him for another moment with the unnerving thoroughness of young children, then picked up her watering can and walked back toward the house with the deliberate pace of someone who had other important things to attend to. Liam watched her go and then went back to checking the drainage. He sent the proposal Thursday evening after Noah was asleep. He'd been over it 4 times. It was thorough, accurate, and priced honestly, which meant it was probably more expensive than what someone undercutting for the work would charge, and cheaper than what someone inflating for the address would charge. He'd laid out a 12-month service plan with quarterly benchmarks and a separate itemized cost for the immediate remediation work. He'd included a note about the rose beds specifically, what needed to happen, what it would cost, and why the timeline he proposed was the right one rather than the faster one. He hit send and made himself not think about it. Friday, he worked 2 other properties and picked Noah up from school and made pasta for dinner and sat at the kitchen table while Noah drew a detailed diagram of what he described as a dinosaur city. "Do dinosaurs need roads?" Liam asked. "The smart ones do." "Which ones are smart?" "The raptors, obviously." "Obviously," Liam agreed. He got the email at 9:17 p.m. when Noah was in bed and Liam was on the couch with a beer. He wasn't really drinking. It was from Randall, but the tone was different from Randall's usual clipped efficiency. "Ms. Grant reviewed your proposal. She'd like to discuss a few points in person before finalizing. Can you be at the property Monday morning at 9? Then, below that, in a second paragraph, she also said, and I'm quoting directly because she asked me to, "Tell him the proposal on the rose beds was correct, and that the other contractors both got that section wrong. Tell him I noticed." Liam read that twice. He set down the beer and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he typed back, "Monday at 9. I'll be there. Urquhart." Over the next 3 weeks, the pattern of their interaction settled into something neither of them had planned. He came to the property 3 mornings a week, usually early. Sometimes Olivia was already working it. He could see her through the window of her home office, phone at her ear, moving from screen to screen with the focused intensity of someone whose brain ran at a speed that the rest of the world couldn't quite match. Sometimes she came out mid-morning with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one without announcing it, and they'd stand near whatever section he was working and talk, not about landscaping, just talk, about the property's history, about Noah, about the city, about nothing important. She didn't talk about work, and he didn't ask. That wasn't a rule either of them stated, it was just where the line seemed to be. He noticed things. He was a person who paid attention. You had to be in his line of work, where the difference between a good outcome and a disaster was often something you caught early. He noticed that she never went anywhere without her phone, but that she sometimes looked at it the way people look at something that costs them. He noticed that she was more relaxed near the rose beds than anywhere else on the property, that she would slow down there, run her fingers along the canes with genuine care. He noticed that on a Thursday morning she came out looking like she hadn't slept, not in the glamorous way magazines described exhaustion, but in the real way, where the eyes are flat and movements are slightly off rhythm, and she stood near him with her coffee without talking for almost 10 minutes before saying, simply, "Hard week." "Yeah," he said. He didn't ask about it. He just stood there. After a moment, she said, "You're not going to ask?" "Not my business." She looked sideways at him. "Most people ask." "Most people want a story," he said. "You don't look like you want to tell one right now." She was quiet for a bit, then, "I hate merger negotiations." "I believe that. Everyone in the room is pretending to want the same outcome while actually working against each other, and everyone expects me to navigate it like it's fun." "Is it ever?" She thought about it. "No, I used to think it would get easier. It doesn't." "Does it get more manageable?" "Sometimes." She looked out over the garden. "When I remember why I built the company in the first place." He didn't ask why she'd built it. She'd either tell him or she wouldn't. She didn't that day. But she came back out an hour later and helped him stake a section of climbing rose that had gotten away from the trellis, which was not something he'd asked her to do, and probably not something a CEO should be doing on a Tuesday morning. She was surprisingly good at it. She knew which canes to train and which to leave alone, and she worked without needing direction. "Your grandmother teach you that?" he asked. "Every summer until I was 12. She tied off a cane with the practiced ease of someone whose hands remembered the motion. "She'd have liked you." "Yeah?" "She didn't tolerate people who said things they didn't mean." He didn't have an answer to that. He just kept working. Chas. He found out about the children's programs accidentally. He'd come across a printout, left on the garden bench, probably forgotten, that listed a quarterly disbursement schedule for something called the Clover Ridge Youth and Family Initiative. He hadn't read it carefully. He'd picked it up to set it aside so it didn't blow away. But the heading had caught his eye, and then the amounts, and then the note at the bottom, private donor. Disbursement to be handled without public attribution per donor request. He set it on the bench where Randall could find it and said nothing. But he'd worked in this town long enough to know the Clover Ridge Youth and Family Initiative. He'd applied for one of their single-parent resource grants 2 years ago when Noah had needed speech therapy, and the insurance gap had been a problem. He'd gotten it. He'd never known who funded it. He stood in the garden for a moment with this information sitting in his chest. Then he picked up the edger and got back to work. He didn't say anything to her about it that day, or the next time, or the time after that. But something shifted in how he thought about her. Not the magazine cover version, not the CEO 300 million valuation version, but the version standing in her grandmother's rose garden in the early morning, tying up a cane that didn't need to be tied up, in a way that said she just needed to be doing something with her hands. Noah met her on a Saturday. Liam had brought him along because Mrs. Callahan was visiting her sister, and the college kids weren't working weekends anymore. Noah was used to coming on jobs. He knew to stay out of the way, to not touch things unless asked, to find somewhere to occupy himself. He'd brought a book and set himself up on the tailgate with the focused serenity of a child who could disappear into a story. Olivia came out at 10:30 with coffee and stopped when she saw Noah. "I should have called ahead," Liam said. "I can reschedule." "No," she said. She was looking at Noah with an expression that was harder to read than her usual directness. It's fine. Noah had looked up from his book. He took in Olivia with the same comprehensive evaluation he'd given the broken lawnmower. Methodical, unhurried. Hi, he said. Hi, Olivia said. I'm Noah. Olivia. He went back to his book. She stood there for a moment, then handed Liam his coffee and said quietly, He's yours. All of him, Liam confirmed. How do you do it? Which part? All of it. The job, him, everything. Badly, most of the time, Liam said. Then, okay, sometimes, rarely well. That sounds like running a company. Probably similar skill set. She smiled then, actually smiled, and it changed her whole face in a way he wasn't entirely prepared for. It wasn't the practiced expression from interviews. It was genuine and a little crooked and gone almost as fast as it appeared. Sophie came out 10 minutes later. She made a direct line for the tailgate and introduced herself to Noah with the solemnity of a diplomat. I'm Sophie, she said. I know about flowers. Noah looked up from his book. I know about dinosaurs. That's cool, Sophie said, meaning it. Your house is really big, Noah observed. I know, Sophie said. It's a lot to clean. Noah nodded sympathetically, as though he understood this completely. We have a good-sized apartment, he offered. It takes forever to vacuum. Vacuuming is the worst, Sophie said. The actual worst, Noah agreed. Liam watched this exchange from 6 feet away. He looked over at Olivia, who was also watching, and her expression was something between amusement and a kind of wistfulness he recognized because he knew it himself. That feeling when your kid is fine, more than fine, easy and whole, and not carrying any of the weight you've been worried about. She doing okay? He said quietly. Olivia looked at him. She is. She's really okay. A pause. That still surprises me sometimes. Same, Liam said. They stood there a moment, not saying anything else. The first time they argued was over the timeline for the perimeter hedges. Liam had mapped out a 4-week schedule for the northern section, which he felt was the right pace to do the work properly without stressing the plants. Olivia had come back with a request to condense it to 2 weeks because she was hosting a board dinner at the property and wanted the grounds complete. He'd stood in her kitchen. She'd invited him in for the conversation, which still felt slightly incongruous, the way a lot of things about her property felt slightly incongruous with his truck in the driveway, and told her flatly that the 2-week timeline was wrong. She'd looked at him like she wasn't used to being told something was wrong. I'm not saying we can't do it, he said. I'm saying we'll be rushing the establishment phase, and you'll have hedges that look good for the dinner and start struggling by spring. That's the choice. My executives don't talk to me like this, she said. Your executives want to keep their jobs. I want to do the work right. She held his gaze for a moment. He didn't look away. He'd learned in 4 years of owning a small business that the moment you backed down from the right answer to preserve a client relationship was the moment you started losing both. Fine, she said finally. 4 weeks. Thank you. Don't thank me like I did you a favor. I'm doing this because you made the better argument. Okay? I'm just saying, let's make the better argument. Don't thank me like I was being generous. He considered that. Understood. You made the right call. She almost smiled again. Better. His regular guys, Danny and Marcus, noticed something was different about the Halcyon Drive work, and not just the scale of it. You've been up there 4 days this week, Danny said one afternoon in the truck. He was 19 and studying landscape architecture at the community college, and asked more questions than any employee Liam had ever had, which was exhausting and also genuinely useful. It's a big property, Liam said. You've been whistling. I don't whistle. You literally whistled the entire time you were reseeding the back slope yesterday. Liam said nothing. Is she hot? Danny asked. She's a client, Liam said. That's not a no. Danny. Just saying, you seem... He searched for a word. Less like you're carrying something. Liam pulled into the equipment yard and killed the engine. He sat for a moment. It's a good contract, he said. Good work makes a difference. Sure, Danny said, unbuckling his seatbelt. It's the contract. He got out of the truck before Liam could respond, which was probably for the best. Og. The last week of October, Liam showed up at the property to find Randall in the driveway, instead of the usual quiet. Randall was on his phone looking tense, and waved Liam toward the back without stopping his call. Liam went around to the side garden and started on the scheduled work, mulching the rose beds for winter, which was a task he'd been looking forward to in the way you looked forward to something that required precision and patience and produced something permanent. He'd been working for about 40 minutes when he heard Olivia's voice carrying from the open window of her office. She wasn't yelling. She was worse than yelling. She was speaking in that controlled, precise way that people use when they are containing something large and dangerous, when every word is being chosen with the care of someone diffusing something. "I don't care what Marcus told the board," she said. "He doesn't have authorization for those conversations, and he knows it. This is not a miscommunication." A pause. "No, I need you to pull every internal communication he's had with the Caldwell group going back to March. All of it." Silence. "I understand what you're saying. I'm telling you what I need." Then the window closed and the voice stopped. Liam kept working. He spread the mulch evenly, pressing it back from the cane bases the right distance. Not too tight, which caused rot, not too loose, which let the frost in. He did it carefully, the way Olivia's grandmother had probably done it, the way he'd do it for any plant worth protecting. When she came out an hour later, she looked the way she'd looked that hard Thursday, flat-eyed and slightly off rhythm. She didn't say anything. She stood at the edge of the bed and looked at what he'd done. "Is it right?" she asked. "Should be." "Good." She crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the mulch near the base of the oldest cane, checking the depth. "My grandmother used to say these roses had outlasted everything. 3 owners, 2 recessions, a flood." "They'll outlast this too," Liam said. She looked up at him. He hadn't meant it about the roses, and they both knew it. She stood, looked out over the garden. "Something is wrong," she said. Not to him, really, just out loud. He didn't tell her it would be fine. He didn't offer anything false. He just stood next to her in the cold October air while she looked at whatever she was looking at, and that felt like enough. After a while, she went back inside. Liam finished the beds and loaded the empty mulch bags into the truck. He sat in the cab for a moment before starting the engine, looking at the house. Every window was lit. Somewhere inside, Olivia Grant was working through something alone, the way she always worked through things, precise, controlled, contained. He started the truck and drove to get Noah. On the way, he didn't whistle, but he thought about what Danny had said, less like you're carrying something. He thought about that quite a bit. He'd been carrying the same weight for so long, he'd forgotten it had a shape. He knew what it felt like when someone was also carrying something. The particular silence they used, the way their hands moved, the things they chose not to say. He recognized it in Olivia the same way he recognized it in himself. He picked up Noah outside the school, and Noah climbed in and said, "How was the big house?" And Liam said, "Long day." And Noah looked at his dad for a second with those eyes that saw too much, and then said, "Me too," and turned to look out the window. They drove home in the comfortable quiet of 2 people who understood each other. Above Clover Ridge, the October sky was going dark in the east, a deep cold blue that meant winter was serious now, that the ground would start hardening soon, that everything worth protecting needed to be covered before the real cold came. Liam drove and thought about rose beds. He thought about what it meant to protect something old and worth keeping. He thought about the woman in the lit house, working through the dark alone. He told himself it was just a contract. He didn't entirely believe that anymore. The merger had a name. Liam learned it the way he learned most things about Olivia's work, sideways, in fragments, never from her directly. He heard it first from Randall, who mentioned it in passing while walking him through a schedule adjustment for the first week of November. "The Caldwell deal closes in 6 weeks, Randall said, checking something on his tablet. "Ms. Grant will need the East Terrace fully operational by then. She's hosting the final stakeholder dinner here." "East Terrace will be done in 3, Liam said. "Good. The timing matters. This merger is—" Randall stopped himself, as though he'd remembered he was talking to the landscaper. "It matters. I understand." Randall looked at him for a moment with an expression that said he wasn't entirely sure Liam did understand, but that he'd decided it wasn't worth clarifying. He went back to his tablet. The second time he heard about it was from Olivia herself, late on a Wednesday morning when the sky had gone the color of old pewter, and the air smelled like rain that hadn't committed yet. She'd come out with coffee and stood at the edge of the terrace watching him set the last of the new stone edging. And after a few minutes, she said, without preamble, "Caldwell's legal team wants to renegotiate 3 clauses before closing." He waited. "My CFO says accept them. My instinct says they're testing how far they can push." He sat back on his heels. "What do the clauses change?" "Oversight structure. 2 of the 3 shift decision-making authority on product direction to the Caldwell board for the first 18 months post-merger." "Is that standard?" She looked at him. "You don't know anything about mergers." "No," he said, "but I know what it sounds like when someone's trying to get a hand on the wheel without asking for the wheel." She was quiet. The wind moved through the oaks at the property line. Somewhere, a gate latch knocked against its post in the intermittent gusts. "My CFO has done this longer than I have," she said, though she said it the way you say something you're testing, rather than something you believe. "That's not the same as being right," Liam said. She turned and went back inside, and he thought for a moment that he'd overstepped. But she came back out 20 minutes later and handed him a second cup of coffee. He hadn't asked for it, hadn't expected it, and said, "I told them no on 2 of the 3 clauses. We'll see what they come back with." He nodded. "My CFO is going to be unhappy." "Probably." "Marcus, he's been with me since the Series B. He's used to me listening to him." And sometimes I wonder if I've been listening too long." She said it flatly, without drama. A person noticing something they hadn't noticed before, the way you notice a hairline crack in a wall and realize it's been there a while. Liam said nothing. He picked up the edging tool and moved to the next section. After a moment, she set her coffee down on the terrace wall and crouched to help him hold the guideline taut, and they worked without talking, and the rain finally made up its mind and started. November moved the way late autumn always did in Ohio, grudgingly, with the light going early and the cold settling in with the permanence of something that had arrived to stay. Liam added layers to his work routine, thick gloves that reduced his dexterity just enough to be annoying, the truck heater that kicked in fully only after 15 minutes of driving. Noah had entered a phase of refusing to wear his winter coat because he considered it aesthetically objectionable, a battle Liam picked every morning and won approximately 60% of the time. The Halcyon Drive work was entering its final phase before the terrace dinner, which meant more hours and more of Randall, who had thawed marginally toward Liam over the weeks. Not warmly, exactly, but with a reduced frequency of checking whether he'd done things right. What was changing, and Liam couldn't have said exactly when it started, was the quality of his conversations with Olivia. They'd stopped being about the property, mostly, or they'd started being about the property and then traveled somewhere else. The kind of conversation that starts with one subject and arrives at another without either person deciding to make that journey. She asked him once about the business, the real version, not the polite answer. He told her about the winter math, the months where the outgoing didn't change and the incoming did, and she'd listened with the focused attention she brought to everything, and then asked 2 questions that were sharper than he'd expected from someone who'd never run a service business. "You're undercapitalized," she said, not unkindly. "Yes." "Have you looked at the SBA loan programs, the ones specifically for single proprietors with kids?" "Yes," he said. "The paperwork is its own full-time job." "I know someone who can help with that." He shook his head. That's not why I told you." "I know it's not." "So." She looked at him steadily. "Liam, I know you didn't tell me to get something. I'm offering because it's a solvable problem and I happen to know someone. Those are 2 separate things." He wanted to push back. He was used to pushing back. The part of him that had gotten through 4 years and a divorce and everything else on his own terms wanted to push back hard. But she was looking at him the way she looked at the clauses in the Caldwell contract, clearly, without sentiment, just seeing the thing as it was. "Fine," he said. "Fine," she said, and smiled, and reached for her coffee. He drove home that evening trying to remember the last time someone had offered him something without making it feel like a transaction. But Sophie had started leaving things for him. It had begun simply: a drawing left on the garden bench, a detailed crayon rendering of what appeared to be the rose beds with a small figure in them labeled Liam in the approximate spelling of a 5-year-old. He'd found it weighted down by a smooth stone, clearly placed with intention. He'd thanked her the next morning. She'd accepted his thanks with the measured dignity of someone who didn't want to make too much of it. The following week, there was a small ceramic pot on the same bench, with a single marigold seedling in it and a note that said, "For your truck," in Noah's printing style, which meant Sophie had clearly recruited Noah as scribe. He brought the pot home. Noah immediately took ownership of it and placed it on their kitchen windowsill with the solemnity of someone installing something important. "Did you write that note?" Liam asked. "Sophie told me what to say," Noah said. "She's very specific about how she wants things written. She's 5. "She's 5.5, Noah corrected, with the tone of someone who knew this distinction mattered. "She's very clear about that." Liam looked at the marigold on his windowsill. He looked at his son. He felt something he couldn't name easily. Not happiness exactly, or not only that, more like the particular sensation of something cold starting to get warm, like coming in out of a long November. He told himself not to read into it. The first conversation that crossed the line from professional into personal happened on a Friday evening in late November, and it happened because of Noah. Liam had miscalculated the timing on his last appointment before pickup and arrived at school 11 minutes late. Noah was fine. He'd been with the aftercare teacher and was finishing a drawing when Liam came in, breathing slightly hard from jogging across the parking lot. But the 11 minutes sat with Liam for the rest of the evening with the particular weight of a small parental failure. He mentioned it to Olivia the next morning, the way he mentioned most things. Without decoration, just as a fact. "I was late picking him up yesterday, miscalculated the drive." She was quiet for a moment. "Was he okay?" "He was fine. He wasn't upset. He was drawing." "But you are." He looked over at her. "He was fine," he said again. "I'm not asking about him." He was quiet. He turned back to the plant bed he was working and pressed a root ball into the prepared hole with the careful, deliberate pressure of someone being precise about something because they needed to be precise about something. "It's the stupid stuff," he said finally. "The times you mess up the small things. Because the small things they add up." "Yes," Olivia said. "Elena it wasn't a bad split. But the thing I remember thinking when she left was, he's going to remember the dad who was there, not the dad who wasn't. That's the whole job. And then I'm still late sometimes." "You can't not be late sometimes," she said. "You have 2 jobs and one of you in a truck that is frankly overdue for a tune-up." He almost laughed. "The truck's fine." "Liam, the truck has a sound when it shifts into second gear that sounds like it's considering something. It's considering it and then it shifts. That's not how vehicles are supposed to work." He was smiling now, which he hadn't expected to be. She'd done that deliberately. He was pretty sure she'd done that deliberately. Said the thing about the truck to break the weight of what he'd said before. He didn't know how he felt about being that readable to someone, but he found he didn't mind it. "Sophie asked me last week why you don't have a wife," Olivia said after a moment. She said it carefully, watching the rose bed rather than him. "What did you tell her?" "I said that was his business." "Good answer." She said maybe you were lonely. A pause. "She's 5.5 and more observant than half my executive team." He didn't answer right away. He tamped down the soil around the root ball, leveled the surface, checked the grade. He was aware of her presence at the edge of his peripheral vision, very still, waiting. "I'm not lonely," he said. Then, honestly, "I'm used to it." "Those are different things," she said. "I know they are." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It had weight, but not the bad kind. "My daughter asks me once in a while when she's getting a dad," Olivia said. Her voice was level, but something under it wasn't. "I tell her that's complicated. She says everything I say is complicated." "She's right." A sound that was close to a laugh. "She usually is." Her father, He stopped. Sorry, that's your business. He was a good person, Olivia said. Not defensive, not sad, just true. We were a terrible idea. We both knew it before we admitted it. Sophie was planned, for the record. That part wasn't the mistake. The mistake was thinking we'd figure out how to be in the same life just because we wanted the same thing for 10 minutes. Yeah, Liam said. I know something about that. She looked at him then, and he looked back. And it was the first time neither of them looked away right away. Then Randall appeared from around the east corner with his tablet and a question about the terrace furniture delivery, and the moment collapsed into logistics, the way most moments did. The terrace dinner was on a Thursday. Liam wasn't there for it, obviously. He'd finished the last of the exterior work the Monday before, and Randall had walked the property with him Tuesday and signed off on everything without adding unnecessary commentary, which felt like high praise from Randall. But he got a text Thursday night at 9:42, which surprised him because Olivia had never texted him before. They'd communicated by email and occasionally by her coming to find him and talking directly, which was her preferred mode. The text said, "Terrace looks good. The roses got a compliment from 3 different people who have no idea what they're looking at." He'd looked at it and typed back, "That's the best kind of compliment." A pause. Then, "How's Noah?" "Asleep. Fought me on the code again this morning. Sophie rejected her scarf for the 3rd day in a row. I've stopped arguing. Smart." Another pause, longer. Then, "Thank you for the work on this. It mattered." He stared at that for a moment. He knew she meant the property. He was also fairly certain she meant something else. And he thought he knew that, and neither of them was going to say it plainly yet. "Anytime," he wrote back. He set the phone down and looked at the marigold on the kitchen windowsill, which was somehow still alive, still stubbornly green despite the fact that Noah watered it inconsistently and the kitchen window faced north. December came in cold and hard, the way Ohio Decembers did when they meant business. The Halcyon Drive contract had moved into its maintenance phase, which meant Liam was there once a week now, instead of 3 times, and the rhythm of the work had changed. Less intensity, more routine. He told himself the change in frequency was fine. It was fine. Mostly. What wasn't fine, or what was becoming increasingly unfine, was what he heard from Danny in the 2nd week of December. Danny had been at a coffee shop on 5th Street and had run into someone from the business school at the community college who had a friend doing an internship at a financial consulting firm that was working with one of the Caldwell Group's competitors. The information had moved, as these things did, through enough degrees of separation to be impossible to verify and impossible to ignore. "The word is that someone inside Grantline has been feeding information to the Caldwell people," Danny said. He said it carefully, watching Liam's face. "Like, not just general stuff. Specific negotiation positions. Internal assessments." Liam had gone very still. "I don't know if it's true," Danny said. I thought you should know, because of the contract." "Because of the contract," Liam said. "Yeah." He drove to the property that afternoon, which wasn't a scheduled visit. Randall's car wasn't in the drive. He knocked and Sophie answered the door, which was not what he expected, and behind Sophie was a woman he didn't recognize, but clearly the nanny, clearly alarmed to find a work-clothes man at the door. "Is Ms. Grant home?" Liam asked. "She's in a meeting," the nanny said. "I can tell her dad's friend is here," Sophie offered helpfully. "I'm not—" He stopped. "Tell her Liam's here. That it's not urgent, but it's not nothing." The nanny disappeared. Sophie looked up at him from the doorway with her mother's evaluating gaze. "You look worried," she said. "I'm okay." "You have the same face my mom makes when she's not saying something." He crouched to her level. "You're too smart for your age, you know that?" "People say that," Sophie said, apparently unconcerned by the observation. Olivia appeared behind her daughter, phone in hand, the meeting clearly interrupted. She read his face the same way Sophie had, but faster. "Talia, can you take Sophie to the kitchen?" she said. The nanny took Sophie's hand and moved away, and Sophie went without protest, though she looked over her shoulder at Liam with an expression that said she was aware she was being managed. Olivia opened the door fully. "Come in." He told her what Danny had told him. He told her in the same plain way he told her everything. without performance, just the facts and the source, and the caveat that the source was third-hand and possibly wrong. She stood in the entryway and listened without interrupting, and her face did the thing it did when she was containing something. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Marcus," she said. "Not a question." "I don't know that." "I do." She said it with a flatness that was worse than anger. "I've known something was off since October. I didn't want to know it. That's different from knowing it. Not for me. Not about him." She pressed 2 fingers to her forehead, briefly, then dropped her hand. "He has access to everything. Our internal models, our negotiation floor, the board's private risk assessments." She exhaled. "If he's been feeding that to the Caldwell side for months, then the whole negotiation has been compromised," Liam said. "Yes." He stood there. She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw something she didn't usually let show. Not fear, exactly. Something rawer than fear. The look of someone who had built everything themselves, from nothing, and was now watching a person they trusted carry pieces of it toward the door. "What do you need?" he said. She almost answered. He could see her start to. Then she stopped and pulled herself back the way she always did and said, "I need to make some calls." "Okay?" "Liam, I know," he said. "Go." He let himself out. He sat in the truck in the driveway for a moment before starting the engine. The cold was absolute, the kind that settled into metal and made everything stiff and uncooperative. Above the house, the December sky was colorless and dense. He thought about what she'd looked like in that moment, just for a second before she'd pulled it back. The look of someone who hadn't let themselves need anyone in a long time and was starting to find that exhausting. He recognized it completely. He started the truck, listened to it consider second gear, and then commit, and drove home through the gray Ohio afternoon with something sitting in his chest that he couldn't name and was no longer entirely trying not to feel. The story broke on a Monday. Liam was loading the truck at 6:40 in the morning when his phone lit up with a news alert he hadn't asked for and didn't want. The headline was blunt in the way financial news always was. Grantline Technologies stock falls 18% amid leaked internal documents. CEO faces board pressure. And below it was Olivia's photo, the professional one from the company website, which made her look composed and formidable, and nothing like the woman who had stood in her entryway 3 weeks ago, looking like someone had put their hand through something she'd built. He read the first 3 paragraphs standing next to his truck in the cold. The leak was real. Someone had fed Grantline's internal merger valuation models, board risk assessments, and negotiation floor numbers to a financial news outlet with enough detail to be credible and enough damage to be deliberate. Investors had started selling before the market opened. The Caldwell Group had issued a terse statement saying they were reassessing the terms of the proposed merger in light of new information. 2 anonymous board members had told the outlet they believed the company needed new leadership to stabilize. He put the phone in his pocket and stood there for a moment in the cold, his breath coming out white. He texted her. "Saw the news. I'm here if you need anything. No pressure." He didn't expect a fast reply. He drove to his first job of the morning, a routine winter trim on a property across town, and worked with his phone face up on the truck bumper, which he never did. She replied at 9:53. 2 words. "It's bad." He typed back, "I know. Are you okay?" A longer pause, then, "No, but I'm working." He thought about that for the rest of the morning. But that. The media coverage was not kind, and it was not slow. By Tuesday, the story had moved from financial news to general news, which meant it had crossed the threshold from industry problem to public spectacle. Liam saw it on the television in the break room of the equipment supplier where he stopped to pick up parts, and the particular discomfort of seeing someone he knew reduced to a chyron and a stock chart was something he hadn't anticipated. The coverage had that quality that business stories sometimes got. The narrative of the overreaching female executive, the company that flew too close to something, the pride before the fall. And it made him tighten his jaw in a way he couldn't entirely explain. He didn't go to the property that week. It wasn't a scheduled visit, and he didn't want to insert himself into something she was clearly fighting through on her own terms. But he found himself driving past Halcyon Drive on Wednesday evening, not stopping, just passing. The house was lit in every window again. Randall's car was in the drive. There was a second car he didn't recognize, and a third. He kept driving. Thursday afternoon, she called him. Not a text, a call, which was unusual enough that he pulled over to answer it. "Are you busy?" she said. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that was fraying at the edges, like a rope that had been under too much tension for too long. "Just finished a job. What do you need?" "I don't need anything. I just—" A pause. "Sophie asked about you today. She wanted to know why you haven't been here." "I didn't want to be in the way." "You're not in the way." She said it quickly, then caught herself. More carefully, "I told her you'd probably be here next week for the scheduled visit." "I can come tomorrow," he said. "If that's useful." Silence. He could hear something in the background. Voices. Movement. The particular ambient noise of a house with too many people in it managing a crisis. "It would be useful," she said quietly. "I'll be there at 8. He heard her exhale. Just once, and controlled, and he had the impression she'd been holding it for a while. "Liam." A pause. "Marcus resigned Tuesday morning, before I could build the case far enough to fire him." "Does that help you or hurt you?" "Both. He's gone, which stops the bleeding. But the board wants a full external audit before they'll reinstate full operational authority to me, and the audit takes time we don't have before the Caldwell window closes." Her voice had the precision of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. "If Caldwell walks, the company's valuation drops significantly. Some of the board members want to use that as an argument that I shouldn't be CEO. Can they do that? They can try. I still have majority support. But majority support that's nervous is not the same as majority support." He sat in the truck on the shoulder of Route 9 with the heater running and the winter light going orange in his mirrors. "You haven't done anything wrong," he said. "That's not always the protection people think it is." He couldn't argue with that. 8 tomorrow, he said. "I'll bring coffee." A sound that was close to a laugh. Not quite, but close. "Okay." That. He brought coffee and Noah because it was a school holiday, and Mrs. Callahan was in Toledo, and Danny was, characteristically, not answering his phone. He explained this to Olivia at the door with the slight awkwardness of a man who'd said he'd handle something and then arrived needing to also handle a second thing simultaneously. She looked at Noah. Noah looked at her with the composed assessment he'd developed, apparently as a personality trait. "Hi," Noah said. "Hi," Olivia said. "Sophie's here?" Noah asked. "She's in the kitchen." "Cool." He was already moving past Olivia into the house, which was either extremely comfortable or extremely rude, and possibly both, and Liam opened his mouth and she held up a hand. "It's fine," she said. It's good. She's been moping. She's 5.5. 5.5-year-olds mope." They stood on the porch for a moment. She looked worse than he'd expected. Not dramatically, not visibly to someone who didn't know how she usually carried herself. But to him, the difference was clear. The shadows under her eyes. The slightly too careful way she was holding her shoulders, like she was consciously remembering to hold them rather than doing it naturally. She'd lost the easy control that was normally so constant it was invisible. He handed her the coffee. She took it and held it with both hands. "How bad was yesterday?" he asked. "The board call was 2 hours," she said. Victor Hale, he's one of the more conservative members, kept using the phrase leadership optics, and I had to stop myself from pointing out that the optics problem was created by someone on my team that he personally recommended hiring. "Did you stop yourself?" "Barely." She looked at the coffee cup. "I said it eventually, in slightly more professional language." "Good." "It didn't land well." "Still good." She looked up at him, and something in her face shifted. Not softened exactly, but loosened. The way a person looks when they've been in a room full of people saying the wrong things, and someone finally says the right one, even if the right one is just still good. They went inside. What? The house felt different with Noah in it. Louder, not disruptively, but in the way that children change the acoustics of a space, making it feel inhabited rather than occupied. From the kitchen came the sound of Sophie explaining something with considerable authority, and Noah responding in the measured tones of someone deciding whether to agree or negotiate. Olivia sat at the long dining table that had been colonized by laptops and printed documents and coffee cups from what appeared to be multiple days of siege-level work. Liam sat across from her, and she walked him through it, not because he could fix any of it, but because he understood she needed to say it to someone who wasn't a lawyer or a board member or a journalist. The leak had been more extensive than the news had reported. Marcus hadn't just fed negotiation data to the Caldwell Group's financial contacts. He'd been building a parallel relationship with a separate acquiring party, a private equity firm called Harrow Capital, which had been interested in Grantline for 2 years. The theory, which Olivia's legal team was reconstructing, was that Marcus had been positioning himself as the man who could deliver the company to Harrow by destabilizing the Caldwell deal and undermining confidence in Olivia's leadership simultaneously. If the board removed her, Marcus would present himself as the stabilizing force and Harrow as the logical solution. He'd been planning it for months, Olivia said. She wasn't looking at the documents. She was looking at the table. I hired him 4 years ago. I interviewed him myself. I trusted his judgment on things I should have been more careful about. You can't run a company without trusting people, Liam said. You can be smarter about which people. Maybe. Or maybe people who are planning something like this are specifically good at being the kind of person you trust. She looked at him. I'm not saying you weren't wrong to trust him, he said. I'm saying he put effort into earning it. That's on him. My investors don't see it that way. Your investors are looking for someone to blame who isn't them, he said. That's different from being right. She was quiet. In the kitchen, Noah said something that made Sophie laugh. A real laugh. The full-body kind that small children produce before they learn to moderate it. Your son is good, Olivia said, almost to herself. He has his moments. No, I mean consistently. He's a good person. At 7. She shook her head slightly. That doesn't happen by accident. He didn't know what to say to that. He looked down at the table. I'm serious, she said. You're doing something right. I see it. I'm doing something, he said. Whether it's right, I'll find out when he's 25. That's how all of it works, she said. You don't find out if you did it right until much later. He looked up at her. She was looking at him with an expression that had moved past professional and past guarded, and into something plainer and more direct than anything she'd shown him before. Not a confession, not a declaration, just a person being visible for a moment, the way people sometimes were when they were too tired to manage the alternative. He held her gaze. I know something about that, he said, and meant more by it than he said, and she heard the more. The problem, as Liam came to understand it over the following days, wasn't just legal or corporate. It was evidential. Marcus had been careful enough to conduct most of his communications with Harrow Capital through a personal device and a separate email account, careful enough to frame his internal conversations as legitimate strategic concerns, careful enough that what Olivia's legal team could prove right now was suggestive without being conclusive. The audit would find more. Everyone believed the audit would find more. But the audit was a 6-week process, and the Caldwell window was 3. He'd been thinking about it without meaning to. Not in any professional capacity. He was a landscaper. He had no expertise in corporate fraud or financial investigation. But he was good at watching, and he'd spent months watching Olivia's operation, and there was something that had been sitting in the back of his mind since December that he hadn't known what to do with. He brought it up on a Saturday morning when he'd come by to check on the winter mulch after a hard freeze and found Olivia in the garden, despite the cold, standing near the rose beds the way she sometimes did when she needed somewhere to be that wasn't a screen. The documents that were leaked, he said, the ones that went to the financial press. She looked at him. Randall mentioned once that your property system, the household management software, runs on the same network infrastructure as your home office, when you're working from here. It does, she said slowly, and Marcus has been to this property more than once. For board events, yes, 3 or 4 times. She was very still. What are you thinking? I'm probably wrong, he said, but when Marcus was here for the August board dinner, did he have access to the house network? She didn't answer immediately.
She turned and looked at the house. Randall would have given guests the Wi-Fi password, she said.
Standard procedure. A pause. If he connected a device to the home network while he was here, then there might be a log, Liam said, on the network hardware, showing what device connected, when, and what it accessed if the router logged traffic. Her expression changed in a way he'd never seen before. Not hope exactly, because she was too careful for hope, but the particular sharpening of a mind that had just been handed a thread. Randall manages the household systems, she said. Yes. He'd have the router access records. If anyone thought to look. She was already moving toward the house. Then she stopped and turned back to him. How do you know about network logging? She said. Danny, my part-timer, got really into home networking during the pandemic. He talked about it constantly for about 6 months. I retained more than I expected to. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Then, tell Danny he might have just done something useful. What? Randall had the records. He had them because Randall was the kind of property manager who kept everything, who stored documentation with the same thorough humorlessness that he applied to terrace furniture delivery schedules and quarterly disbursement printouts. He pulled the router traffic logs for the August board dinner within the hour, and what they found was not conclusive, but it was a thread. Marcus Chen's personal device, identified by its MAC address, which matched a device registered to a laptop he used for what he'd described to colleagues as personal travel, had connected to the Halcyon Drive Home network at 7:43 p.m. during the dinner. It had remained connected for 2 hours and 11 minutes. The traffic log showed data transfers consistent with large file access, and the destination IP addresses, when Olivia's head of IT security ran them remotely on a Saturday afternoon because Olivia had called him, and he answered because apparently her entire technical staff responded to calls on Saturdays when she needed them, resolved to a cloud storage service that was not affiliated with any Grantline corporate account. He had pulled files from her home office network, personal files, which included early-stage documents for the Caldwell negotiation that she'd been working on before the formal process began. That's how he had the initial framing documents, Olivia said. She was standing at the dining table with her IT security head, a tightly wound man named Priya who had arrived in 45 minutes and was now doing things on a laptop that Liam didn't follow. Before the formal data room was even set up, he had my personal working documents. This is enough for the legal team, Priya said. Combined with the corporate communication patterns, this establishes access and intent. This is your thread. She looked at Liam. He was standing near the door, slightly out of the way, aware that he was in the middle of something that had nothing to do with landscaping. Noah was still in the kitchen with Sophie and Talia, working on something that involved a significant amount of construction paper. The afternoon light had gone flat and gray outside. You found it, she said. I thought of it. Your IT guy found it. Don't do that. I'm just saying, Liam. Her voice was steady and direct. You found it. He held her gaze. He nodded once. She turned back to Priya, and they went into the mechanics of what needed to happen next. The legal team, the evidence preservation, the question of how and when to bring it to the board. Liam stayed in the room, but stayed quiet. And at some point, Talia brought in coffee, and he took a cup and stood near the window and watched the rose garden in the gray winter light. He thought about the 60-year-old canes under the mulch, the way things could look finished from the outside, dormant and damaged and beyond recovering, and still have something living underneath if you knew how to look. He was getting his coat from the hallway chair at 6 o'clock, intending to collect Noah and get home for dinner, when Olivia followed him out of the dining room. Stay, she said. He turned. For dinner. Stay for dinner. She said it with the precision she brought to everything, but there was something less controlled in it than usual, something that had decided not to be managed. Sophie's been asking if Noah can eat with us for weeks, and I don't want to be in this house alone with this tonight. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to fix anything, she said. I'm just asking you to stay. It was the first time he'd heard her ask for something without packaging it as something else, without framing it as useful or practical or for Sophie's benefit, just asking. He hung his coat back on the chair. Okay, he said. She exhaled. That same held breath he'd heard on the phone released. She nodded once, then turned and went back to the kitchen to tell Sophie, and he heard Sophie respond with a volume that was disproportionate to the news, and Noah's quieter corresponding sound of satisfaction. And for a moment, Liam stood alone in the hallway of this enormous house and felt the strange particular weight of being somewhere you didn't expect to belong, starting to fit. Dinner was pasta because Sophie had demanded pasta, and it was slightly overcooked because Talia had been distracted managing the afternoon's chaos, and nobody said anything about it. Noah ate 2 full bowls. Sophie talked without meaningful interruption for most of the meal about a book she was reading that involved a rabbit who solved mysteries, and Noah listened with the attentiveness he gave things that genuinely interested him and asked questions that made Sophie pause and think before answering. Olivia sat at the head of the table and ate and watched her daughter talk and didn't look at her phone once. Liam sat across from her and thought, this is what it looks like when someone finally stops. He drove home at 8:30 with Noah asleep against the window, the truck's heater working on a slight delay the way it always did. The December streets empty and orange lit and quiet. His chest felt full in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Not resolved, not fixed, not the clean ending of a thing, just full, like a room with a fire in it, the door finally closed against the cold. His phone buzzed once on the seat. He didn't pick it up until he was parked in front of their building. It was from Olivia. One line. Thank you for today, all of it. He sat in the dark truck for a moment, then he typed back. Anytime, get some sleep. A pause. Then, I might actually be able to. He pocketed the phone, lifted Noah from the seat, still asleep, heavy the way sleeping children were, and carried him up the stairs. Noah didn't wake. Liam got him into bed with the practiced efficiency of years of this. Shoes off, covers up, the small particular weight of a child who trusted completely that he would be taken care of. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Outside, the December night was hard and cold, and the city made its low, constant sound. Somewhere across town, in a house full of lit windows, a woman who had spent years being strong alone was maybe, possibly, learning to let that be enough without also needing to be alone. Liam went to his own bed. For the first time in a long time, he fell asleep quickly. The legal team moved fast once they had the thread. Priya's network evidence went to Olivia's lead attorney, a woman named Catherine Moss, who had the particular efficiency of someone who had spent 20 years in corporate litigation and no longer wasted time on anything that wasn't directly useful. Catherine reviewed the router logs and the IP resolution data over a Sunday evening and called Olivia at 7 the next morning. This is enough to open the door, she said. It establishes unauthorized access and data transfer. Combined with the communication patterns your IT team has been documenting from the corporate side, we can build a case that Marcus Chen engaged in deliberate corporate espionage with the intent to facilitate a hostile acquisition. How long to formalize it? I want 2 more days to make sure everything is documented in a way that's bulletproof before we take it to the board. If we go to the board with something that has gaps, Hale and the others will pick at the gaps instead of looking at what the evidence actually shows. 2 days, Olivia said. 2 days? And Olivia, don't talk to the press. Don't issue anything. I know the silence is uncomfortable. The silence is killing us. The silence is temporary. A premature statement is permanent. Olivia didn't love it. She told Liam this on Monday morning when he stopped by, not for scheduled work. The grounds were in winter mode and there wasn't much to do. But because he'd gotten her text at 6:50 a.m. that said simply, Catherine says 2 days, and I hate waiting, and he'd had a morning with nothing until noon. He found her in the formal sitting room, which she apparently used as a secondary office, when the dining table felt too chaotic, surrounded by the organized debris of someone who processed information on paper, even in the age of digital everything. Printed documents, handwritten notes, coffee cups at various stages of completion. 2 days isn't that long, he said, sitting across from her. Every day the story sits without a counter-narrative. The counter-narrative writes itself, she said. Investor confidence erodes. People who are neutral start reading between lines that aren't there. You can't control what people decide while they're waiting, he said. You can only control what you give them when the waiting ends. She looked at him. When did you get philosophical? I've always been philosophical. You just usually have too much going on to notice. She almost smiled. Almost. Victor Hale called me this morning. The board member. He wanted to discuss transition options. In the most clinical possible language, he suggested that I might want to consider a voluntary step back to a non-executive role while the audit and legal matters resolve. Liam said nothing for a moment. What did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it. She said it with a flatness that made clear this was not the answer she'd wanted to give, because Catherine told me not to say anything that could be characterized as combative until we've presented the evidence. So you're sitting on it. I am sitting on the most professionally enraging conversation I've had in 3 years. Yes. She picked up a pen and put it down again without using it. He said the board's primary concern was stability, as though I'm the instability, as though the person who stayed, who documented, who is actively fixing this, I'm the variable they're nervous about. That's because fixing it requires them to admit they were part of the system that let it happen, Liam said. Hale recommended Marcus. You told me that. If Marcus is the villain here, Hale made a bad call. It's easier to make you the problem than to own that. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the December wind moved through the oaks with a sound like the whole property exhaling. You see things very clearly, she said. Not a compliment exactly. More like an observation about something she was still deciding how she felt about. I pay attention, he said. It's the most useful thing I know how to do. She looked at him across the room, and there was something in her expression that had been accumulating for a while, since the terrace dinner, since the kitchen on the Saturday after the story broke, since dinner with overcooked pasta and Sophie's talking and Noah's careful listening, something that had been building the way pressure built under soil in winter, invisible until the ground shifted. She didn't say it. Whatever it was, she folded it back. I need to go over the board presentation with Catherine this afternoon, she said. Will you... She stopped. Will I what? Nothing. It's not your Olivia, she exhaled. Will you still be here when I'm done? I know it's not a work thing. It's just... Sophie has that thing at school until 5, and Talia's off Mondays, and the house is very quiet, and I don't particularly want to be in a quiet house after that conversation. He looked at her. She was holding his gaze with the effort of someone who had asked for something and was waiting to find out if that was a mistake. I've got nothing until 3, he said. After that, I have to get Noah. Bring him here for dinner again. 3rd time this month. Sophie will consider it insufficient. He let out a breath that was close to a laugh. Okay, he said. The relief on her face was small and controlled and completely real. Catherine's board presentation was on Wednesday morning, and Liam knew about it only because Olivia had mentioned it the evening before, briefly, in the tone of someone setting down something heavy. He hadn't asked for updates. He'd learned, in the time he'd known her, that she processed things on her own timeline, and that the most useful thing he could do was be available without requiring her to manage him while she was managing everything else. His phone rang at 12:37. He was eating a sandwich in his truck outside a property on the east side, and he answered before the second ring. The board voted, she said. He waited. The evidence was enough. Catherine presented the network access logs, the IP data, the communication records from the corporate side, and the timeline of what was accessed versus when Harrow Capital made their first approach to our larger investors. A pause. Victor Hale went quiet about 40 minutes in and didn't say another word. And the board is removing Marcus and his 2 primary allies, a director named Green who had been coordinating with Harrow on their side, and a financial officer who had been selectively preparing reports that made the company look less stable than it was. She said it in the precise sequence of someone who had rehearsed it, but her voice at the end of the sentence had something in it that wasn't precision. They're reinstating my full operational authority. The audit continues, but as a formality at this point. Catherine says the evidence is clean enough that Caldwell will almost certainly re-engage. He set down the sandwich. Olivia, he said. I know. A long breath. I know. You okay? I don't know yet, she said honestly. I think I will be. I think I'm still in the room in my head, if that makes sense. I haven't gotten to the part where it's over yet. That takes a while, he said. The catching up. Yes. A pause. Sophie wants macaroni tonight. The box kind, not the real kind. She's very specific. Noah's a fan of the box kind too. Of course he is. I'll bring it, he said. We'll make the box kind. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. The silence that followed was warm in a way that silences between them had been getting warmer for weeks, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said so. 6 o'clock, she said. 6 o'clock, he said. The evening was ordinary in a way that felt extraordinary by contrast to everything around it. Sophie sat on the kitchen counter, narrating the macaroni process with the authority of someone who had very specific opinions about the cheese-to-pasta ratio, despite having never actually made it herself. Noah stood beside Liam at the stove with the focused cooperation of a child who took cooking seriously. Olivia sat on a stool at the kitchen island with a glass of wine. She was mostly not drinking, and she looked at her daughter, and she looked at Liam's son, and her face had the expression he'd seen only a few times, the one that meant she had stopped performing and was just present. More cheese, Sophie said. There's already a lot of cheese, Liam said. More. Noah looked at his father. She has a point. You're supposed to be on my side. I'm on the side of more cheese, Noah said, with the diplomatic clarity of a child who had identified where the correct position was. Liam added more cheese. Sophie nodded with satisfaction. They ate at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room, and the difference was notable. Less space and less formality, and the kids arguing about whether Raptors would be good at soccer, a debate that had apparently started in Sophie's room before dinner and hadn't resolved, and the ordinary clatter of forks and the particular comfortable noise of a kitchen in use. After dinner, the kids disappeared to Sophie's room and left the kitchen quiet. Liam washed the pot, and Olivia dried it, which was the kind of domestic ordinary that neither of them acknowledged as anything other than what it was, which was two people in a kitchen after dinner. The Caldwell lawyers called Catherine this afternoon, Olivia said. She was drying the pot with methodical strokes. They want to restart preliminary conversations next week. Apparently the board vote and the evidence summary Catherine shared with them was enough to change their position. That's good. It's very good. She set the pot down and folded the dish towel. It's the best possible outcome, professionally. But, he said, because there was clearly a but. She leaned against the counter and looked at him. When I was sitting in that board meeting this morning, listening to Catherine lay out everything Marcus had done, how long it had been going on, how carefully he'd built it, I kept thinking about how much of my day for the past 4 years has been about the company. Not just work hours, the mental space, the constant running calculation of what needs to happen and what might go wrong and what position to take. She paused. And somewhere in the middle of this woman methodically dismantling everything Marcus built against me, I thought, even if this all works out exactly right, even if I get everything back, I've been living in a way that left room for this to happen because I wasn't watching the right things. He dried his hands and turned to look at her. I'm not saying the company doesn't matter, she said. I built it. It matters. But I had a conversation with Sophie 2 weeks ago where she asked me if I was happy, and I told her I was busy, and she said those were different things. She shook her head slightly. My 5-year-old. 5.5, he said. She looked at him. Something broke open very slightly in her expression. Not dramatically, not in the way things broke open in movies. Just a small fracture in the controlled surface, just enough to see what was underneath. I haven't known what to do with you, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an honest statement from a woman who was precise about language and was choosing these words deliberately. Since the beginning, you don't perform anything. You just are what you are. And I don't have a framework for that. He was quiet for a moment. I don't have a framework for you either, he said. You're the smartest person I've ever spent time with, and you can be completely obtuse about things that are directly in front of you. That's not very flattering. No, but it's true. What things? She said. What am I being obtuse about? He looked at her steadily. You know what things? Her eyes held his. The kitchen was very quiet. From Sophie's room down the hall came the muffled sound of children's voices in a disagreement that sounded friendly rather than distressing. She took a breath. I don't know how to do this, she said. Whatever this is, I don't have a good record. I told you about Sophie's father. Before that, there was someone in graduate school who I cared about and chose the company over and then spent 2 years pretending I'd made the right call. A pause. I make the company the thing and everything else is arranged around it. That's how I'm built. Maybe that's how you built yourself, he said. Not the same thing. She was quiet. I'm not asking you to change how you work, he said. I know what this is. I'm a landscaper with a 7-year-old and a truck that thinks before shifting. I'm not somebody who belongs in your world. Don't do that, she said sharply. What? I'm just a working class guy. I don't belong here thing. Don't. Her voice had an edge in it that surprised him. You found the evidence that saved my company. You've been more honest with me than anyone on my payroll. You show up without being asked when it matters, and you don't make it into something, and you somehow raised a kid who is kind at 7 years old. She stopped. So don't tell me you don't belong. He absorbed that. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, her voice leveling back out. They stood in the kitchen in the quiet. It was not the quiet of distance. It was the quiet of two people standing very close to something and deciding whether to step. He didn't push it further. Not that night. He was who he was. Someone who moved at the pace of the work in front of him, who didn't rush establishment phases, who knew that some things needed time to take root before they could hold any weight. He'd learned that from the ground up, literally. He collected Noah at 8:30, who came out of Sophie's room with crayon on his left hand and looking thoroughly satisfied. Sophie walked them to the door with the proprietary air of a hostess. You'll come back, Sophie told Noah. Statement, not question. Yeah, Noah said. Thursday, Sophie said. She looked at Liam. I'll check the schedule, Liam said. Sophie's expression indicated that the schedule would confirm Thursday. He got Noah into his coat. The coat, no argument for once, which he credited to the general goodwill of the evening, and they walked to the truck under a sky that had gone black and clean, cold enough for stars. Noah was buckled in and quiet for half a block before he said, Dad? Yeah. Do you like her? Liam drove. She's a good person, he said after a moment. Noah considered this with the seriousness he brought to important things. I think she likes you, he said. She watches you when you're not looking. You're 7. I'm almost 8. You're 7.5, Liam said. That's still old enough to notice things, Noah said with perfect logic, and went back to looking out the window. Bati. The week that followed was the week the story turned. Catherine Moss issued a formal statement on behalf of Grantline Technologies on Thursday morning that was measured, precise, and devastating in the way legal language could be devastating when the facts behind it were solid. It laid out the evidence of unauthorized data access, the coordinated effort to destabilize the company's merger process, and the board's unanimous decision to remove the individuals responsible. It named Marcus Chen. It named Green and the financial officer. It did not editorialize. It did not have to. The financial press, which had been running the collapse narrative for 2 weeks, pivoted with the particular agility of outlets that followed evidence more than they followed stories. By Friday, the stock had recovered 8 of the 18 points it had lost. By the following Tuesday, Caldwell's legal team was back at the table. Liam read about most of it in brief texts from Olivia. Not detailed updates, just the kind of shorthand you used with someone who already knew the context. Stock up, Catherine pleased. And then Caldwell called. Meeting set for next week. And then on a Tuesday evening, Victor Hale sent me a formal apology today. 2 paragraphs. I think he used a template. He'd typed back, "Did you accept it?" Professionally, yes. Personally, I'm reserving judgment. That seems right. He's still on the board. I have to work with him. People can do bad things for understandable reasons and still be worth keeping. A long pause before her reply. Then, is that a general philosophy, or are you talking about me? He'd stared at that for a moment. Then, neither. I was talking about Hale. Sure you were. Good night, Olivia. Good night, Liam. Ochar-san. He didn't go to the property for almost 2 weeks after that. because the maintenance schedule didn't call for it, and because he had enough self-awareness to know that manufacturing reasons to be somewhere was a thing he was capable of and shouldn't indulge. He worked his other properties. He fixed a persistent carburetor issue on the mower that had been costing him time since September. He helped Noah with a school project about ecosystems that somehow evolved into a 2-evening deep dive into wetland biology that neither of them had planned. He was also, without quite admitting it to himself, giving Olivia room. She'd said something true in her kitchen. She didn't know how to do this. He'd heard it, and he believed it, and he respected it. Pushing towards something when a person was still finding their footing in it was how you made them feel like they needed to run from it. He'd learned that the hard way, a long time ago, in a marriage that had never quite found its balance, partly because both of them had kept leaning toward each other at the wrong angles. He was in the equipment yard on a Thursday afternoon, doing the kind of tedious end-of-year inventory that he'd been putting off since October, when his phone rang. Not a text. A call. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Her voice was different. Not bad different. Quieter. The controlled quality relaxed in a way he'd only heard a few times. "What are you doing right now?" "Counting fertilizer bags." "Can you stop?" "I've been wanting to stop for 2 hours." "Come to the property," she said. "Not for work. Just come." He stood in the middle of the equipment yard with the inventory clipboard in his hand and the winter afternoon going gold around the edges, and felt something he recognized as the specific sensation of a moment you'd remember. "Give me 30 minutes, he said. He was there in 25. She met him at the door before he knocked, which meant she'd been watching for the truck. She was in different clothes than her usual work mode. Jeans, a dark sweater, hair down in a way he'd almost never seen. She looked like a person rather than a position. She didn't say anything when she opened the door. She just looked at him. "Hi," he said. "Hi." A pause. "Sophie's at a birthday party until 5. Talia picked her up." "Okay. So it's just—" She stopped. "Just us," he said. "Yes." She held the door open. "Come in." He came in. She led him to the kitchen, which had become the room they defaulted to, the room that felt most like a place rather than a property. And she put on coffee without asking because she knew he wanted it, and he sat at the island and watched her move around the kitchen with the ease of someone who was finally in a space they were comfortable in. "I've been thinking," she said, her back to him, waiting for the coffee. "About?" "About what I said. In this kitchen. A couple weeks ago." She turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at him directly, which was the only way she knew how to look at things. "I said I didn't know how to do this." "You did say that." "I've been thinking that not knowing how to do something isn't the same as not being able to learn it." She said it carefully, like a thesis she'd stress-tested before presenting. "And I think I've been using 'I don't know how' as a reason not to try when the real reason was that I was—" She stopped, started again. "Scared," she said. "I was scared. I'm not used to saying that." He looked at her steadily. "I know." "I don't want to keep using it as a reason," she said. The coffee maker finished. She turned and poured 2 cups and set one in front of him and kept one in her own hands, and she looked at him across the island with the clearest, most unguarded expression he'd ever seen on her face. He reached across the island and put his hand over hers where it held the cup. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face. She didn't move away. Outside, the December afternoon was going the color of cold fire, that specific low Ohio winter light that turned everything briefly gold before the dark. It came through the kitchen windows and lay across the counter and across their hands, and neither of them said anything for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "I should tell you," she said quietly, "that I don't do anything halfway." "I know that about you," he said. "So if we're—" "I know," he said. "Me neither." She turned her hand under his so their palms were together, and she held on with the grip of someone who had spent a long time holding everything alone and was choosing right now to hold something with someone else. It wasn't clean. It wasn't the end of complicated. There was a company still in recovery, and a merger still in process, and 2 kids who were going to have opinions, and a man who owned a small business that still barely survived winter, and a woman who had never learned to put herself first without guilt. None of that had gone anywhere. but she was holding his hand in her kitchen in the gold winter light, and it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough for now. January came in without ceremony. The Caldwell merger closed on the 14th, which was a Thursday, which meant nothing symbolically, but which Liam would remember anyway, because Olivia called him from the conference room 20 minutes after the final signatures with a voice that was quieter than he expected. Not triumphant, not relieved in the dramatic sense, just the voice of someone who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just set it down and was standing there feeling the absence of the weight. "It's done," she said. "How do you feel?" A pause. "Tired," she said. "Really, genuinely tired." "That's honest?" "I thought I'd feel more." She said it like she was slightly embarrassed by this, like she'd expected a larger internal response to the finish line and was confused by the quiet. 4 years of building this, 2 months of almost losing it, and now it's done. And I'm standing in a conference room and I want to go home and make tea and sit on the kitchen floor. So do that. Catherine's organizing a celebratory dinner. Go for an hour and then go home and make tea. A short breath of something that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent. You make everything sound very manageable. "One thing at a time," he said. "That's all it ever is." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the ambient noise of the conference room behind her. Voices, movement, the particular sonic texture of professional celebration in a space with high ceilings. She'd stepped away from it to call him, which he knew she'd done deliberately, and which he held without making anything of it. "Come over tonight," she said. "After the dinner. Late is fine. Noah's with Mrs. Callahan until 9. After 9, then." "Okay," he said. He heard her exhale. "Okay," she said back. Look, he arrived at 9:10 with Noah asleep over his shoulder, because Noah had been at Mrs. Callahan since 3 and had apparently expended every unit of energy he possessed and was not waking up for anything. Olivia opened the door and looked at the sleeping child draped across Liam's shoulder with an expression that started as surprise and settled into something softer. "Sorry," Liam said quietly. "He's out." "Put him in the guest room," she said, already stepping back to make space. He carried Noah down the hall, laid him on the guest bed, got his shoes off with the practiced efficiency of years, pulled the blanket up. Noah didn't stir. He had his father's capacity for deep sleep, which was the one purely restful thing Liam had passed on to him. He came back to the kitchen. Olivia was making tea, which made him smile. "How was the dinner?" he asked. "An hour and 20 minutes, she said. Catherine made a speech. Victor Hale shook my hand and said I'd handled everything with great professionalism, which is the most Victor Hale thing he could possibly have said. "Did you shake his hand back?" "I did." She poured hot water over the tea bag with controlled precision. "I was professional about it." A pause. "I may have squeezed slightly harder than necessary." "That's fair." She handed him a cup and leaned against the counter and looked at him in the kitchen light. And she looked different than she had in September when he'd first stood in her formal garden with a clipboard and a measuring wheel. Not unguarded. She would probably never be fully unguarded. It wasn't her architecture. But open in a way she hadn't been. Like a window that was usually stuck had been worked loose. "I've been thinking about something," she said. He waited. With Olivia, when she said she'd been thinking about something in that specific tone, it meant she'd been thinking about it extensively and had arrived at a conclusion and was now presenting the conclusion rather than the thinking. "The company structure, post-merger. There are things that need to change," she said. "Not just personnel. The way I've been running things, the decisions I was making that I thought were about strategy and were actually about control." She looked at her tea. "Marcus was able to do what he did partly because I'd concentrated too much decision-making in a small inner circle and not built enough redundancy into the oversight structure. I thought I was being efficient. I was being a single point of failure." "What are you going to change?" "Distributed authority across a broader leadership team. Real authority, not nominal. People who can push back without being managed out." She looked up. "It's going to be slower. Some things will get decided in ways I wouldn't have decided them." "That's hard for you," he said. Not unkindly. "Extraordinarily," she said. "But I keep thinking about what you said, about the hedge timeline. about how sometimes the choice between fast and right is actually the whole question. He remembered that conversation, standing in her kitchen in the early weeks, telling her that a 2-week rush would produce hedges that looked good and struggled by spring. She'd pushed back. Then she'd given in. Then she'd told him he'd made the better argument. "You're applying landscaping logic to corporate governance," he said. "I am. I feel like there's a joke in there somewhere." "There probably is." She almost smiled. "The point is, I've been thinking about what I've been building toward. And I think for the first time in 4 years, I'm actually not sure the company is the answer to that question." He looked at her. I'm not walking away from it," she said quickly. "Don't misread that. But it's been the whole thing for so long, the whole shape of my life. And I kept telling myself that was a choice I was making deliberately. And then I'd look at Sophie asking if I was happy, and..." She stopped. "I think I was hiding in it. The company. It was the most legitimate possible reason to not deal with anything else." "I know something about that," he said. "The business." "Yeah." He looked at his tea. "When Elena left, the business became... It was easier to be failing at something I could control than failing at something I couldn't. At least with the work, if things went wrong, I could trace it back to a decision I'd made. Soil condition, drainage, timing. It was mine to fix." "And Noah?" "Noah was the thing I was the most scared of getting wrong," he said, "which meant I poured everything into it. And that was good, mostly good. But it also meant I didn't leave much room for anything else. Because leaving room for anything else meant having something else to get wrong." She looked at him steadily. "We're a pair," she said. "We are." He met her eyes. Two people who figured out how to survive alone and then spent a long time confusing that with being fine. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet around them. Noah in the guest room, Sophie in her room, the whole property settling into the particular silence of a winter night with people in it. "I don't want to survive alone anymore," she said. She said it plainly, the way she said things when she decided to stop managing them. "I'm not saying it gracefully. I don't have a graceful version of this. But I know what it felt like in the past few months when you were there, and I know what it felt like when you weren't, and those are different feelings, and I'm done pretending they're not." He set down his tea. He came around the island and stood in front of her, and she looked up at him with those direct, complicated eyes. And she was not performing anything, not managing anything, not containing anything. She was just there. He put his hand against her face, and she leaned into it the way people leaned into warmth when they'd been cold for a long time, and he kissed her in the kitchen at 10:30 on a Thursday night, with the merger finalized, and Noah asleep down the hall, and the rose beds covered in mulch outside, and the January dark pressing against every window. It was not cinematic. Her elbow bumped the counter. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. She pulled back once and looked at him like she was confirming something, and then came back, and it was real and slightly awkward and exactly right. Good. They didn't announce anything. There was nothing to announce, really. They were two people starting something that had been starting slowly for months, and the pace of it felt right and didn't need a press release. Sophie found out the way Sophie found out most things, which was by observing and concluding before anyone told her. She came to Liam one Saturday morning in late January while he was working on the rose canes and stood beside him with her hands in her coat pockets and said, without preamble, "Are you my mom's boyfriend now?" Liam considered how to answer this. "That's something your mom and I are figuring out," he said. Sophie looked at the rose canes. "Noah says you've been happier." "Noah talks too much." "Noah talks the right amount," Sophie said firmly. "He says you whistle more." Liam looked at the cane he was working on. "Does he?" "He said that means you're happy because you only whistle when you don't know you're doing it." She turned her head and looked at him with her mother's direct evaluation. "Are you happy?" He thought about it honestly, which she deserved. "More than I've been in a while," he said. "Yeah." She nodded slowly, processing this. "Good," she said. "My mom needs someone who doesn't think she's scary." "Your mom isn't scary." Sophie raised her eyebrows in a way that was so precisely her mother's expression that it was almost funny. "Okay," she said, clearly not agreeing. "She's intimidating," he said. "That's different." "What's the difference?" Scary is when you want to run away. Intimidating is when you want to pay attention. He looked at Sophie. I've always wanted to pay attention to your mom. Sophie considered this with the philosophical seriousness of a 6-year-old encountering a new idea. Then she said, "That's a good answer," and walked back toward the house, apparently satisfied. Shut. The charity event was Olivia's idea, though she would have said it was the company's idea. The annual Grantline Foundation spring benefit that had been on the calendar since October. She'd planned to attend, give remarks, write a check, be the CEO at the podium. That had always been the shape of it. What she hadn't planned was what she said when she got to the podium. Liam was there because she'd asked him to come, and he'd worn the only good jacket he owned and spent 20 minutes arguing with his reflection about his hair before Noah had appeared in the bathroom doorway and said, "You look fine, Dad," with the weary patience of someone who had watched this before. The event was at the Grantline Foundation's Conference Center in downtown Clover Ridge. Not a grand space, but a genuinely good one, full of the people who actually ran the programs the foundation funded. Single parents from the Resource Network, youth program coordinators, the teachers and social workers and case managers who dealt with the unglamorous middle of the work. Olivia had been specific about the guest list when she'd organized the event, and Liam understood why when he saw who was in the room. These weren't donors performing generosity. These were people who were in it. He stood at the side of the room with Danny and Marcus, his own Marcus, who had come as his +1 on the grounds that Danny had helped find the evidence and deserved to see how it ended. Danny had dressed up and was now trying to look like he came to these things regularly. It was not convincing. "This is fancy," Danny said quietly. "You've been to nicer places," Liam said. "Name one." "The graduation dinner your parents threw." Okay, that was one time. On the low stage at the front of the room, a foundation program director was finishing her introduction of Olivia with the kind of prepared language that signaled a transition was coming. The room had the attentive quality of people who were genuinely glad to be there, which was rarer than it should have been at these events. Olivia came to the podium in a dark green dress that Liam had never seen before, and would remember precisely, and looked out at the room with the particular stillness she had when she was about to say something real. She started with the foundation. She talked about the programs, not in the abstract way CEOs talked about philanthropy at events, but specifically. The tutoring network in the East Side schools. The single-parent resource grants that had helped, she said, over 200 families in Clover Ridge in the past 3 years with childcare, medical costs, and business licensing fees. She knew the numbers, and she knew what they meant, and the room felt it. Then she paused. "I want to say something that's not in the remarks I prepared," she said. "And I want to say it in front of this room in particular, because the people here deserve honesty, more than they deserve a polished speech." The room went very still. 6 months ago, my company nearly went under because someone I trusted decided that what I'd built was something to take rather than something to support. She said it without drama, just fact. It was the hardest professional experience of my career, and I handled parts of it well and parts of it badly, and I spent a significant portion of it being scared in a way I'm not used to admitting. Liam stood at the edge of the room and watched her. "The person who helped me most during that time was not on my executive team," she said. "He was not a lawyer or a consultant or a board member. He was someone who showed up to do a job and stayed when the job got hard for reasons that had nothing to do with the job." She looked out at the room. "He didn't stay because he needed something from me. He stayed because that's the kind of person he is. The kind that's become rarer than it should be. Someone who tells you the truth because it's more useful than telling you what you want to hear, and who shows up without needing recognition for showing up." Danny shifted beside Liam. Liam was very still. "I've spent most of my adult life building things," Olivia continued. "Algorithms, companies, systems, networks. I'm good at it. But the thing I've been the worst at is the thing that was always available to me and that I kept deciding wasn't a priority." She paused. "Being present, in my own life, with my daughter, with people who matter." She looked at the room. "The programs this foundation funds exist because I believe that what people need most, underneath everything, is not money or resources, though they need those too, and we're going to keep providing them. What people need is to not be alone in the hard parts."
She stopped.
Took a breath that was just slightly more visible than her usual controlled composure. I almost had to learn that the hard way, she said. I'm lucky I didn't. She thanked the room. She said what needed to be said about the foundations next year. She stepped back from the podium to applause that was real rather than polite, and she made her way down from the stage and through the room, stopping to talk, receiving people with the specific quality of attention she gave things when she meant it. She reached Liam eventually. He was still standing at the edge of the room. She looked at him. He looked at her. That was not in the remarks, he said. No, she said. You okay? Yes. She said it like she was confirming it for herself as much as for him. I'm actually okay. A pause. Victor Hale is somewhere in this room, and his face, when I mentioned someone who told me the truth, was... I can't describe it. I'm sure it was fine. It was deeply uncomfortable, and I enjoyed it a little. That's human, he said. She almost laughed. Actually laughed, quietly, and put her hand through his arm with the ease of someone who had decided to stop making everything harder than it was. Danny materialized at Liam's shoulder. That was about you, he said, with the tactful subtlety of a 19-year-old. Danny, Liam said. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. You whistled the whole drive here. Danny. I'm getting a drink, Danny said, and disappeared in the direction of the catering table with great dignity. Olivia looked up at Liam. Do you whistle? Apparently. When? When I'm not paying attention to it. She held his gaze for a moment with an expression that was warm and real and slightly complicated in the way that her face always was when she was feeling something she hadn't finished cataloging. Then she said, Come on, there are people I want you to meet. Noah met Sophie's birthday with a handmade card and a small cactus in a painted pot, because Sophie had mentioned once, months ago, that she liked things that survived in difficult conditions, and Noah had remembered. Sophie received both gifts with the seriousness they deserved and placed the cactus on her windowsill next to the window that faced south, which was the right window, which meant she'd been thinking about where she'd put it. The birthday party was small, 6 of Sophie's school friends and their parents, and Liam and Noah and Olivia moving through the afternoon with the particular grace of a woman who was genuinely present in it. She'd made the cake herself, which she told no one, and Liam found out only because he came into the kitchen early and caught her correcting the frosting with the focused expression of someone who did not consider themselves a baker but was refusing to be defeated. You could have ordered one, he said. I know, she said, not looking up from the frosting. Sophie wouldn't have known the difference. I would have. He watched her work for a moment. There was something in the image that he wanted to hold, not sentimentally, not in the way he used to hold things by gripping them too hard. Just the ordinary fact of it. A woman making her daughter's birthday cake in the morning in her own kitchen, correcting the imperfect frosting because her standards were what they were, with the person she was seeing leaning against the doorframe watching her. You're staring, she said. I'm appreciating, he said. Those are different things. Sometimes. She looked up then, briefly, and smiled in the real way. The crooked one. The one that appeared and disappeared fast and was better than any of the composed expressions she knew how to produce. Then she went back to the frosting. The party was loud and imperfect, and exactly what a 6-year-old's birthday should be. 2 of the children had a disagreement over a game that required brief parental intervention. The cake was slightly lopsided on one side, which Sophie pointed out with the candor of someone who appreciated honesty, and Olivia said, I know, with complete equanimity, and everyone ate 2 pieces anyway. Noah spent most of the party next to Sophie as a kind of informal older kid ambassador to the other guests, which was a role he'd apparently assigned himself without being asked. Liam watched him negotiate a toy dispute between 2 5-year-olds with the measured patience of someone who had grown up watching his father handle difficult situations by staying calm and present, and felt something in his chest that he couldn't have put into clean language and didn't try. When the guests had gone and Sophie was in the bath and Noah was on the living room floor with a book, Olivia sat at the kitchen table with the particular settled exhaustion of a good day fully used. Liam cleaned up around her, not because he'd been asked, just because it needed doing and he was there. She had a good day, he said.
She did. Olivia had her chin in her hand, watching him move around the kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned the space. She told me last week that this was going to be her best birthday because Noah was coming. He looked over. She said that? Verbatim. A pause. She also said she wanted a dog, and that you would probably know what kind to get. That's a separate conversation. Entirely, Olivia agreed. But she's filed it. She files everything. She really does. He dried his hands and came to the table and sat across from her. She looked tired in the good way. Not the way she'd looked in December when the crisis was pressing against everything, but the honest tiredness of someone who had been fully in their life for a day. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. The programs, the Youth and Family Initiative, the single-parent grants. She looked at him carefully. She'd always known he knew. He'd never brought it up directly. This was the first time. What about them? She said. Noah's speech therapy, 2 years ago, the grant that covered the insurance gap. He held her gaze. That was you. She didn't confirm it or deny it. She just held his gaze back. I didn't know you then, he said. I didn't know who funded it. I just knew it came through when I needed it. He paused. I want to say thank you. Properly. You don't have to, I want to, he said. Not because it changes anything, but because he talks now the way he thinks, which is clearly and without stopping, and I don't know who he'd be if that had gone differently, and He stopped. The sentence was fuller than he knew how to finish. She put her hand across the table. He took it. It's what the fund is for, she said quietly. I know. But it was him. He looked at their hands on the table. So, thank you. She squeezed his hand. She didn't make it into anything larger than what it was. She'd learned that from him, maybe, the way he handled things by letting them be what they were. They sat at the kitchen table in the quiet left by a birthday party, holding hands, and that was all, and it was enough. Whoa. Spring came late that year, the way Ohio Springs did when they wanted to remind you that winter didn't leave on a schedule. The ground stayed hard through most of March, and the rose canes at Halcyon Drive held their resting state until the third week of the month. And then one morning, Liam came to check on the beds and found the first new growth. Small red-green nodes pushing out along the oldest canes, the ones that had been there for 60 years, the ones that had outlasted 3 owners and 2 recessions and 1 very difficult winter. He stood in the morning garden and looked at them for a long time. There was a thing he'd learned in years of working with plants that he thought about sometimes in the context of other things. Growth didn't announce itself. It happened underground, in the cold, in the dark, for months before it was visible. You couldn't rush it, and you couldn't force it, and if you dug it up to check whether it was happening, you'd damage the very thing you were trying to grow. You had to trust the conditions you'd prepared and the patience you'd maintained and the simple stubborn fact that things with roots tended to come back. He'd prepared good conditions. He'd been patient. He was still, in most honest assessment, a man with dirt under his fingernails and a truck that thought before shifting and a business that got thin in winter. That hadn't changed. He hadn't become something else to fit into someone else's life. He'd stayed what he was, and what he was had been enough, and that was the thing he'd needed to learn most. He heard the door behind him. Olivia came across the garden in the early morning light with 2 cups of coffee, the same way she had in the beginning, except that now she handed him one without the slight formality of a client being hospitable to a contractor. She just handed him the cup and stood beside him and looked at the roses. First growth, she said. Just came through, he said. She looked at the small nodes on the old canes with an expression that was private and complete. He knew what she was thinking, or he knew enough of it. The grandmother who had planted them, the summers of learning their names, the 60 years of persistence in the same ground. She would have been here by now, Olivia said. She always came in March to check. What would she have said? She thought about it. She would have said they look good. Then she would have found 3 things that needed correction and pointed them out and then made tea. A pause. She was particular. It runs in the family, Liam said. She looked sideways at him. Was that a compliment? Unambiguously. She looked back at the roses. He looked at her profile in the spring morning, the clean line of it, the slight softness that had grown into the way she held herself over the past months, the way she stood beside him now, without maintaining the professional distance she'd kept in the beginning like a personal policy. "Noah asked me last week," he said, "if Sophie was going to be his sister." She turned to look at him. "I told him that was getting ahead of things," he said. "What did he say?" "He said he was just asking because he wanted to know if he needed to get used to sharing his room." She was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" "I said probably not his room specifically." A pause. "Probably not his room specifically," she repeated. "That's what I said." She looked at the roses. He could see her processing it, not panicking, not pulling back, just letting it sit and finding her shape around it. That was how she handled things she wanted, carefully, with precision, giving herself time to be sure. "Sophie has a lot of opinions about room decor," she said finally. "Noah has a lot of opinions about dinosaurs. Those could coexist." "They could," he said. She turned and looked at him with her direct, unguarded morning face and said, "I'm not in a hurry. But I'm not in that direction either." "I know," he said. "Okay." She looked at the roses. "Okay." They stood in the garden and drank their coffee while the spring morning came up around them. Cold still, the way early spring was always cold, with warmth arriving in brief intervals between the wind. The rose canes held their new growth up into the light with the unhurried certainty of things that had been through worse winters and knew, in whatever way plants knew things, that the season was changing. Liam thought sometimes about what he would have told himself at the start of the previous September, the morning the lawnmower died on Maple Creek Drive and Noah said, "Please start." And it did. What would he have said to that man in the truck, like tired, good, slightly hollow, running on stubbornness, and the specific love of a father who had decided that being present was the whole job? He wouldn't have believed most of it. He wouldn't have believed the estate on Halcyon Drive would become the place where he drank coffee in the morning and knew where everything was kept. He wouldn't have believed that a woman who ran a company worth $300 million would stand in a garden in the spring and hold a coffee cup with both hands and look at 60-year-old rose canes and let him see her face. He wouldn't have believed that his son would have a small ceramic pot on the windowsill that had grown into a plant the size of something real, watered by a boy who took the responsibility seriously every other day. He wouldn't have believed that he would stop thinking of himself as a person in maintenance mode. That was the thing, really. He'd been maintaining, keeping things from getting worse, managing the winter math and the late pickups and the absence in the evenings. He'd been good at it. He told himself that good was enough, that solid, present, hardworking, there was sufficient. And it was. It was sufficient. But sufficient and whole were different, and he'd stopped expecting whole somewhere along the way. And he hadn't noticed the stopping. He noticed it now by contrast. By the difference between the man standing in that equipment yard counting fertilizer bags in November and the man standing in this garden in the spring. He hadn't become more. He just stopped being less than he was. That was the thing about walls. Not the ones other people built around you, the ones you built yourself, out of survival, out of the reasonable accumulation of losses, out of the very sensible decision to make yourself smaller so there was less of you to damage. Those walls worked. They were effective. He'd lived behind his for years, and it had been fine. It was just that fine and alive weren't the same, and he'd needed someone particular to show him the difference. Someone who was doing the same thing behind her own walls, who was also fine, who was also successfully surviving her way through a life that looked complete from the outside and had a quiet in the middle of it that she'd learned to call by other names. They'd taken each other's walls apart, not by force, not by demanding openness, or making ultimatums or deciding the other person needed to be different, just by being present and consistent and real, over months, in a garden, in a kitchen, over coffee and overcooked pasta and a child's birthday cake with imperfect frosting. The simplest things. Underneath everything, always the simplest things. Olivia's hand found his arm, and she leaned against him slightly in the way she did now, without announcing it. A small automatic weight, a small claim, the body's way of saying here without making a speech about it. He felt it and shifted to accommodate it the way you shifted for something that belonged.
Across the garden, the heritage roses held their new growth. Down the hall, in a kitchen that had become the place where things happened, Sophie was already awake and explaining something to Talia with great authority. In 3 hours, Liam would pick up Noah and come back, and they would have lunch, and the afternoon would be what it was, and none of it would be perfect. It would be real. It would be theirs. It would be enough, and more than enough. And all the things that mattered were already here. He drank his coffee in the March morning. He didn't know he was whistling until Olivia looked up at him and smiled.